Thank you. All right, hello, and welcome to today's video, where we are going to be talking about this idea that if they had it worse than you, that your pain, your trauma, your experience doesn't count, you don't need healing, you don't need support, you shouldn't be feeling how you're feeling, you shouldn't be reacting and responding how you're responding, you should be fine because other people's trauma, other people's experiences were worse than yours. All right. So, if you have ever thought this thought, as you've been doing your healing work, as you've been doing your personal growth, your trauma work, whatever kind of modalities that you're using to try to support yourself in feeling better and being able to, like I say, process what you've been through. If you've ever had the thought, I really shouldn't be reacting as strongly as I'm reacting because what I went through just wasn't that bad, right? My childhood was not as bad as these other people who were physically abused, and I was not physically abused. My experience with being harmed by my caregivers was not as bad as these other people's. My experience with mental health issues was not as bad as other people, and therefore I don't deserve support, I don't deserve resources, I don't deserve kindness. I wasn't bullied the way other people were bullied. I had resources that other people didn't have. I had, access that other people didn't have. I had both parents instead of maybe only one. Uh, there are people on the planet who are literally, they don't have food. They're in positions of being at war. They lose both of their parents. They experience extremely traumatic, awful things. And we know that these things are happening. And my experience was not that bad. My experience was more in the range of normal. And therefore, I should be fine. It wasn't that bad, and I shouldn't be needing the support that I'm needing. I'm not worthy or deserving of any support or compassion. And this idea that how we are responding and how we are reacting, the ways that we are now, people pleasers, or the ways that we now have coping, numbing, and self-sabotaging behaviors, the ways that we hate ourselves, the ways that we shame ourselves, all of our patterns shouldn't be this bad because what I went through wasn't as bad as other people. This is one of the most common things that people come to me with, especially in my one-on-one coaching work, is this idea that, like, I'm looking at people who had real trauma. I'm looking at people who had real suffering. I'm looking at people who went through something actually hard. And they seem fine, or they seem better than me, or they are the ones that actually deserve support, and they are the ones that actually deserve help. And I don't, because what I went through just wasn't that bad. It wasn't as bad as them. And again, there must be something wrong with me that I'm reacting and responding the way that I am. That I have, developed the traumas that I have developed and the responses to trauma that I have developed. Because what I went through was so much less than these other people, and they seem to be better than me or fine, or they seem justified in their maybe extreme responses, and I am not. This, again, is one of the most common things that I hear in my coaching work and in my mystery school, everywhere that I put out this work, is this idea that, like, I shouldn't be reacting this badly and I don't deserve love and support because other people had it worse than me. And what I want to talk about today is a couple of things. First thing, I want to talk about why our brains kind of come up with this story. Because, of course, at first glance, it seems really logical and reasonable. It seems like this is just logic. This is just reason. This is just observation of reality. my experience wasn't as bad as other people, and therefore I should be fine. Therefore, I shouldn't be reacting and responding as badly as I am. There's no way that my trauma was that bad that I am responding and reacting the way that I am. There must be something wrong with me. I'm weak. I'm shitty. No worries. And then the other side of it, of just, I don't deserve support. I shouldn't be needing someone to be kind to me. I don't deserve the compassion that I'm being shown in these coaching sessions or in the mystery school or in these videos. Because again, what I went through just wasn't even that bad, and I should have my shit together more than I do, right? I want to talk about how, again, that can seem really logical. That can seem like it's just black and white, facts of reality. We shouldn't be reacting and responding the way that we are. We don't deserve love and compassion, and that just seems totally logical. When in reality, what's actually happening is we are putting on a defense mechanism against feeling our pain and against doing the work that we need to do to process and heal from our pain. Okay? That thought of they had it worse than me, and therefore I should not be needing the support that I need. I should not be reacting and responding the way that I'm responding. And I don't deserve to be held or supported. That is a protective mechanism. Okay? First things first. That is a protective mechanism. So again, if you are having these thoughts, I don't deserve love, I don't deserve compassion, I don't deserve being treated like what I went through was a big deal because other people had it worse than me. I really want you to think of it like this, okay? If you fell out of a 10-story window and you broke 10 bones, yes, you are in pain, you are injured, you had a real experience where you really did break 10 bones and you really did fall 10 stories. And then someone next to you falls out 20 stories. They fall to the ground 20 stories, they break 20 bones and have massive organ damage. This is the situation. You fell out 10 stories, you broke 10 bones. This person fell out 20 stories, broke 20 bones, and they have massive organ damage. Does that then mean that your 10 broken bones are no longer broken? Because someone else fell out of 20 stories and broke 20 bones. Does that then mean that your 10 bones are now fixed? You should be able to just get up, walk away, be fine. Is that reasonable? I think all of us would be able to agree that that is not reasonable. That is not how reality works. Just because someone has a physical injury that is worse than yours, it does not erase the injury that you have. And if we were to say, okay, well, you only broke 10 bones, it's not that big of a deal, and we don't address those 10 bones that are broken, we just don't bother with them because we're like, it's not as bad as other people. It's not as bad. You should be fine. What are we thinking is going to happen as you try and stand up and walk away from that accident without treating your 10 broken bones? Are you just going to be fine? Are you going to be able to just go on with life and everything is totally normal and totally peachy? No. You're going to be in extreme pain, right? You're going to be debilitated because you have 10 broken bones. You're not going to be able to operate normally. And if you try to function normally, if you attempt to just go out and, walk and get groceries and clean your house and go to work with your 10 broken bones that are not supported, you are going to cause more and more and more damage over time. It's going to get worse and worse and worse to the point where your injuries might become as bad or worse than the person who fell out of 20 stories. Because time does not heal our wounds. Right? Just because time has passed, just because we are older now, or the abuse has passed, or the trauma is no longer happening, does not mean that we were not affected. And if we do not address what has happened to us, if we do not address the trauma, if we don't address the pain, it is only going to fester and get worse with time. So this is the actual reality that I want to present to you. Whenever you think that thought, whatever I went through isn't as bad as other people. So I don't need to do my healing work. I don't deserve it. I don't deserve love and compassion. I should just be fine. Well, number one, no, you shouldn't. Pain and trauma is not comparative. Pain and trauma is not comparative. It is not based on if someone had it worse than you, it is therefore going to affect you less what you went through. Okay? In real reality, trauma and the effects of trauma, this is what we need to realize, are incredibly individual and based on so many complex factors that there is almost no way of comparing how something is going to affect one person versus how it's going to affect another. But we can absolutely say that trauma is not relative and that pain is not relative. What you went through affected you the way that it affected you, and that is reality. And there is no way of changing how what you went through affected you by comparing yourself to somebody else. Okay? So the next kind of ditch that we can get in here is other people went through similar things as me, or other people went through worse things than me, and they seem to be doing better than me. Why is it that I went through something that seems relatively less bad than these other people, but my reaction to it seems to be bigger, stronger, more intense than their reaction? There are people out there who seem to have had just as bad a childhood as I had, and they're not struggling with the existential dread and the self-hate and the not being able to get their shit together, and they're not being able to get their life together the way that I am. What's wrong with me that I went through something similar to someone else? Maybe a little less, maybe a little more, but it seems that my reaction to it is so much worse. It must be, again, that there's something wrong with me. To that I say, there is nothing wrong with you. The way that you have reacted and responded to what you have been through is, again, not relative. It has nothing to do with anybody else or anyone else's experience. Okay? When we look at the effects of certain, traumas or things that we can experience in childhood especially, or in our lives as adults, we can absolutely say that there are some patterns for how humans tend to respond to these things, right? We know that when we grow up in a household where we do not feel like our caregivers are going to be there to support us, where we feel continual abandonment from our caregivers and rejection and them pulling away, it's very common that we're going to develop people pleasing and fawning characteristics. It's very common that we are going to develop these patterns of trying to figure out who we need to be and what we need to be loved, accepted, and approved of by the people around us. And then we're going to grow into adults who have poor boundaries, who are hyper vigilant and hypersensitive to what everyone thinks about us. We're going to be incredibly sensitive to anyone in our environment who seems to not like us, who seems to not approve of us. And it's going to feel to us like the end of the world when we're rejected, or when people don't love us, or when people don't accept us. And that, again, is a predictable outcome from being continually abandoned and not loved and not approved of by our caregivers. Some of us might have developed coping mechanisms. Well, yeah, the people-pleasing thing is just a really big one when we're super abandoned. Now, for some people, they're going to have some sort of life circumstance where maybe they had someone in their life that was approving of them. They had a single or a couple authority figures that really fed into them and supported them and gave them a sense of self-love and autonomy. Maybe these people just have an internal sense of being able to figure out their self-love path more than other people. Some people have intellectual, proclivities towards more self-hate, more looking for the negative, not being able to see the positive. We all have different circumstances, and we all have different natural ways of being. Okay? And third thing, we all have different ways that we perceive what we have been through. So, another huge thing that we need to understand about trauma and adverse experiences is the level that they are going to affect us, and the ways that they are going to change us, the ways that they are going to mold our behavior, the ways that we are going to adapt to these things, both, in ways that might become harmful overall or ways that might be helpful overall, is highly dependent on our individual circumstances, which again, no one's circumstances are just like yours. So you and this person, all three of you may have experienced similar relationships with your caregivers, similar levels of rejection, similar levels of abandonment. But within that, you and these two other people have experienced totally different circumstances in every other area, right? Some of you may have had other caregivers that stepped in. Some of you maybe didn't. Some of you maybe had a really great friend group. Some of you might have had a very adversarial friend group. Some of you might have had support in some ways, and other people, they were also experiencing physical trauma, and they were also experiencing chronic illness, and there was a whole cluster of things that were going on. And that is going to impact how you respond to your adverse experiences. And then again, to add to that, your specific personality, your specific perception, the way that you see the world your natural ways of seeing the world, the ways that you were trained to see the world, all of that is going to affect how you perceive the adverse experiences that you've been through. And all of this is going to affect the way that you react and respond. It's all going to impact the way that you are affected by the adverse experiences you go through. So again, right? Someone who has osteoporosis, who already has weak bones, who is already in a place of vulnerability because of how they are, falling down onto something hard might break a bone. Whereas someone who has been, able-bodied their whole life and lifts weights and has been, putting calcium in their bones over and over and over again might fall in that exact same way at that exact same time and not break a bone. And that doesn't mean that there's something wrong with the person that broke the bone and not something wrong with the person who didn't. Neither one is better than the other. It's just we went into the adversarial experience from different places and different platforms. So we were affected differently. Same thing now, the next thing is, especially with adversarial experiences, we have to understand that trauma and the way we are affected by what we go through is largely dependent upon how we perceive the situation. So this is another big thing that a lot of my coaching clients especially have a really hard time wrapping their minds around, which is this. When we go through adversarial experiences as children, especially as children and as young adults, in that time, we have to remember that the way we viewed the world, the way that we saw ourselves, the experiences we had had up until that point are very different than how we might see the world now as an adult with autonomy. Okay? So when we go through adversarial experiences as children, we have to remember our childhood perspective of that. So the childhood perspective of going through an adverse experience is going to be one of, I am trapped in this. I do not have the capacity to get myself out of it, to save myself, to remedy the situation, because I am not in control of my reality. I am not in control of my circumstances. I am not in control of my caregivers. I am not in control of the authority figures around me. I don't even understand how this whole thing works. I am essentially a victim. From our childhood perspective, the only reason that we might be experiencing adversarial experiences from our childhood perspective is because we are doing something wrong. That's how we see it. Because we are not able to conceptualize and understand that other people are having other experiences outside of us that have nothing to do with us. We are not able to perceive that other people have different values that could be totally out of alignment with real reality. We are not able to see that not everything is because of us or in response to us. All we know is if I am experiencing pain, it's because there's something wrong with me, I'm doing something wrong, and I'm broken. So we're going to perceive, I can't escape this, I can't get out of this, I can't fix this, I have no power over it, and the only power I might have, if I can see that I have any power, is to blame and shame and figure out what I am doing wrong so that I can fix or change myself to try to get out of it. And third thing, we are not able to perceive that we can be rejected by our caregivers and still be okay. Right? From our adult perspective, we might be able to look back on our childhood and say, I was fine. Right? My caregivers were never going to let me starve. They weren't going to actually completely abandon me and leave me out on the street to die. None of that ever happened. My childhood wasn't that bad. But that's from your adult perspective. And that's from your hindsight. Now you see that none of those horrible things happened. But from your childhood perspective, you didn't know that. And you couldn't perceive that. From your childhood perspective, there was an existential threat in your body every time your caregivers pulled away from you or rejected you or told you that they didn't love you or told you that you were the reason for their pain or they confided in you in their pain before you were ready for that. That was going to be a big existential threatening problem for you as a child. And you would not have known that you were going to be okay. From your childhood perspective, the way you perceived it is likely, if my caregivers pull away, I'm going to die. And you may not have had that conscious thought, but we have to remember that in that temporary codependent relationship we have with our caregivers as children, it really would feel to us like if caregivers pull away, I am going to die because they are my source of everything. If caregivers are harming me, I can't even conceptualize that caregivers might be doing something wrong because I rely on them for everything. I see them as the gold standard. So it must be that there's something terribly wrong with me and I must change in order to get out of this pain. Okay? From our childhood perception, rejection, abandonment, and harm by our caregivers on any level. So even if they weren't physically abusing us, if we felt that they emotionally pulled away from us over and over and over again, if we had emotional needs and they were like, it's up to you to solve it, I don't know. If we expressed certain characteristics and they didn't like it, there was going to be a deep-seated fear in us that we were not going to be okay. And that is what is going to have gotten programmed into our nervous system. That we were experiencing literal life and death situations. Whether that was in alignment with true reality or not, that's how our bodies and our minds perceived it. And the way we are affected by trauma and by adversarial experiences have so much to do with how we perceived it at the time. So much more than what the actual reality might have been. So again, if someone is experiencing rejection of their caregivers, but they generally perceive that their caregivers love them and are going to be on their side and are going to take care of them, those moments of rejection and abandonment are not going to impact them the same way as someone else who perceived that their caregivers could drop them at any moment. Someone who had a deeply insecure attachment with their caregiver is going to perceive levels of rejection and their caregivers getting mad at them and pulling away from them in a much more dramatic way than someone who has more of a secure connection with their caregivers who gets yelled at. How we perceive what we went through has a massive impact on how it is then going to affect us. So we can't look back at our circumstances and say, I should not be reacting the way that I'm reacting because what I went through wasn't that bad. My caregivers kept a roof over my head. They always fed me. I wasn't at risk of dying. There are other people out there who really were at risk of not having their needs met, and they seem to be fine. More than I was. What's wrong with me? Nothing. The way you perceived the situation made it seem like you were not going to be okay to you. The complexity of what you went through, the whole host of factors outside of just that adverse experience, your natural proclivity, the way that you naturally think, the way you were trained to think, the other adverse experiences you were experiencing, the other support you did or didn't have, the way you perceived the context of your situation. All of these things were going to impact the way that your adversarial experiences affected you. Okay? So we cannot compare our adversarial experiences and how we are responding to them to anyone else's. Because how we experienced what we experienced is completely individual and has nothing to do with anybody else. Okay? So again, this idea that they had it worse than me, and therefore I should not be responding the way that I am, or I don't deserve support, completely negates reality. That is the bottom line. Okay? So again, when we are thinking these thoughts, that I don't deserve support, I don't deserve love, I shouldn't be getting any help or compassion because I didn't go through something as bad as other people. I really want you to understand that, generally speaking, that's a way of trying to invalidate our own experience. Number one, usually because we have had our experience invalidated. We have almost always, like the people who come to me and say, I shouldn't need this help, I'm not deserving of this help, this support that I need from what I went through isn't that bad or shouldn't be this way because what I went through isn't that bad. We're almost always going to discover that that is rooted in a pattern of having been invalidated and having had your experience minimized and not respected over the course of your lifetime. You are now treating yourself the way that you were treated, right? So if you're the kind of person who's saying, my trauma was not that bad, I shouldn't need this kind of support, I want to ask you, were you continually told by your caregivers that your pain wasn't that bad, that your experience wasn't that bad, that other people had it worse than you, that I'll give you something to cry about? You know, that saying of, oh, you think you're suffering now, I will show you real suffering, I'll show you something real, you need to just buck up and get over it, it's not that bad, other people have it worse than you. Or, right, you're being weak, you're being needy, get over it, everyone else just gets over it, we all go through hard things, it's not that big of a deal. If you received that kind of messaging over and over and over again, chances are you learned how to say those things to yourself. And that's really what's coming up here, is that you have been trained to invalidate yourself because you have been so deeply invalidated over the course of your life. And then the second thing is you've been trained not to center your own experience. You've been trained to view your life through the context of how it affects others or how other people perceive it. And this is a really big one, right? Because again, in that childhood temporary codependent relationship, when we don't have a secure connection, when we don't have someone that we feel we can, rely on, that's going to love us, that's going to validate us, that's going to help us process through what we're going through, our focus is going to become extremely external. Because again, we feel deeply dependent upon the people around us. Because we are deeply dependent upon the people around us. We do need their love. We do need their support. We do need their help because we are children who cannot give these things to ourselves. So when we don't have that secure connection, we are trained, we adapt to that by externalizing our focus. By going for, okay, what are you feeling? What are you thinking? How is my behavior affecting you? To the point where we are so deeply centering the thoughts and the feelings and the opinions of other people over our own experience that when we aren't understood, when we aren't validated, when we respond in a way that other people say, you shouldn't be responding like this, you shouldn't be needing this, you should just get over this, we internalize that as truth because we are not used to having our experience and our perception and our thoughts validated. We are used to saying, you're right? If I'm reacting in a way that other people say I shouldn't be reacting, I shouldn't. If I am responding in a way that other people are not responding, there's something wrong with me because my experience is wrong, because it's different than what other people are experiencing or what other people are saying I should be experiencing, right? If you were not validated in a secure connection through your childhood, you would have learned that the way to survive is to deeply perceive what everyone else is perceiving and be way more concerned with other people's feelings and other people's experiences than your own. Because your attempt at survival was, I'm going to write myself off so that I can be and do and express in the way that the people around me want me to. Right? So you learned to say, I shouldn't be feeling this way. They don't feel this way. They're not responding this way. We learn to center other people's experiences over our own because that's how we were trying to figure out what people wanted so that we could be approved by them and then we could be safe. So again, someone who had a secure connection is going to have an easier time validating their own experience, centering their own emotions, understanding how they're feeling and why they are responding to what they're going through in the way that they are responding. Because they have practice knowing that I can be validated and I can be loved and I can still get provision even when I'm not hyper fixating on everyone around me. When we don't have a secure connection, we learn to disassociate from our own perspective and to center everyone else, and then to assume there's something wrong with us if we are reacting or behaving in a way that is different than what everyone around us says we should be, or everyone else how everyone else is reacting and responding. Does this make sense? So just because other people don't understand your reaction, just because your reaction to what you went through is different than your siblings, and their perspective of it is it wasn't that bad, just get over it, and you're freaking out, it doesn't mean that you're wrong. It doesn't mean that you are weak. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It means you're different. It means you experienced it differently. It means you had different circumstances, you had a different way of being than your siblings, than the other people who went through something similar to you. And that is why you are reacting and responding differently. And their experience and your experience are both valid. it's fine that other people might say, this didn't affect me that badly, and it affected you a lot. It doesn't matter that it didn't affect them as much as it has affected you. If it affected you, it affected you. And that's reality. And there's no way that you're going to think your way out of it to get to a place where you're not having the response that you're having, that you no longer have the self-sabotage and the ways that you cope and the ways that you numb, because you are going to convince yourself that your experience wasn't that bad. Okay? This is an attempt, a lot of the time, to say someone else's life was worse than mine, and I'm reacting worse, so I should just be fine. Or I should just be fine, it wasn't that bad. That's an attempt at us trying to mitigate the pain of what we went through. That's us trying to say, if I can just reason in my head that what I went through wasn't that bad, I'm going to erase the effects. But again, I pose it to you like this. If you drink poison and you try to convince yourself it's not that poisonous, it's not that bad, it's only a little bit of poison, is your body going to then stop reacting to the poison? Absolutely not. You are going to be equally impacted by that poison, whether you try and tell yourself this poison was the worst poison ever, or this poison is not poison. Right? If you take a poison and you don't know it's poison, you're not consciously aware. You have no idea. You think you're just drinking a glass of water and there's poison in it. You're not aware of it. Is that then going to mean that the poison doesn't affect you? No. You are going to be poisoned by that poison in the exact same way, whether you're conscious of it or not. So trying to convince yourself that what you went through wasn't that bad is not going to take away the effects. It's not going to heal you. It's not going to make you feel better. In the moment, it can sometimes feel like I'm invalidating myself enough that I don't feel the pain. And I can just pick up and go and like live my normal life and get my shit together, and I'm going to be fine because what I went through wasn't that bad. But we're always going to find that the ways that we have adapted because of our adverse experiences are always going to catch up with us. We're going to fall back into our procrastination. We're going to fall back into the ways that we numb, cope, and self-sabotage. We're going to, be people pleasers. We're going to fawn. We're going to do all of these things. Unless and until we're ready to actually face the trauma and adverse experiences that we went through and how they impacted us. So as much as we might want to believe that we can convince our way out of it, that we can just be fine if I just convince myself it wasn't that bad, we can't. Okay, so I got a comment. That sounded almost exactly how my mother would reason out of taking any responsibility for what she did to me that was damaging, and then it was no wonder why I would overestimate my level of resilience when going through a rough patch in any area of my adult life. It isn't that bad. Many children in Peru get abused, abandoned by their alcoholic mothers, and you're a big girl now. You should get over it, my mom. Exactly. It's not reality. It's simply not reality. We cannot convince our way out of our trauma and how it has affected us by comparing it to someone else, or saying it wasn't that bad, or centering someone else's perspective, or looking at other people who went through something similar and seeing that they aren't responding the way that we are. Okay, so this is the next big thing. The way that you have responded, the way that it has impacted you. If you are not able to just get up and go and do what you were conditioned to do, the way that your siblings are, or the way that your friends were, or the way that everyone else seems to be, without processing their shit, right? There are a lot of people out there who are not doing this work, who are not processing their adverse experiences, who are just going on with what their caregivers expected of them, what society expects of them, and they seem to be fine. And we're looking at ourselves being like, there must be something so wrong with me that I can't just get over it and move on like it seems that everyone else has. Right? Like people say, yeah, bad things happen to me too, but that's in the past and I'm fine now. And we think, what's wrong with me that I can't do that? Nothing. There is nothing wrong with you that you can't do that. Okay? Number one, we have to remember that all of us are sensitive in different ways. Some of us, the way that we naturally are, is more in alignment with how our caregivers expected us to be or how culture expects us to be than others. Right? So for me, the way my caregivers wanted me to be was so different from how I actually am that I got incredibly traumatized and had huge, deep self-hate because I was so unable to be what my caregivers wanted me to be. And even when I was succeeding at being what my caregivers wanted me to be, I was struggling and suffering so badly because it was so different than what was true to me. Whereas some of my friends had equally intense expectations from their caregivers, but what their caregivers expected them to be was not so different from who they actually are. And them operating within the systems and me operating within the system are two very different experiences. It's simply not as painful for them as it is for me. So for a long time I thought, I must just be incredibly weak. What is wrong with me? That I can't get my shit together and just get a normal job and live a normal life like everybody else. There must be something wrong with me that I have to do all this processing work and that I have to deconstruct and that I have to be so upset about what my caregivers went through or, put me through and all this stuff. And what I've learned over the years is just no. It affected me worse than it affected other people because I'm a very different person, and that's okay. There are things that I cannot tolerate that other people can because we're different. And that doesn't mean that they're bad for not doing their work, and it doesn't mean that I'm bad that I couldn't do it. It just means we're different. And what I required in order to heal and to come to a place of being able to love myself and live a life that feels good for me was a lot more than what other people require. And that's okay. That's who I am. And yes, my childhood impacted me in a way that other people might have been able to go through the same thing and not have been that impacted. It wouldn't have been that bad for them because they are a different person than me. They perceived it differently than me. They would have had different circumstances than me. We're just different. So learning to say, my experience is not invalid because it is different from someone else's is a huge thing. And then being able to say, okay, right? These other people might be able to be fine with things. These other people might be able to go and just, get married and have the 2.5 kids and the white picket fence and work their career, and they seem fine. And I can't. That's not going to work for me. Even when I try to do that, that doesn't work for me. That doesn't feel good for me. I have a lot of pain and a lot of trauma around how I was treated and how I was spoken to and what I was expected to become. And I have to work through all of that now, and it seems like these other people don't have to. It might be. And there's nothing wrong with you. You're just a different person who was affected by what you went through the way you have been affected. So there is no relativity in our adverse experiences. There is no truth to the idea that someone had it worse than you, and therefore you shouldn't be reacting and responding the way that you are. And last thing that I really want to say is, you are reacting and responding to the exact degree that what you went through affected you. You're not making it up. You're not being dramatic. You're not just not getting your shit together. You're not just lazy. You're not just missing your purpose. You're not just weaker than everyone else. It affected you the way that it affected you. And that is valid. And you deserve whatever kind of support you need to work through that and to figure out what kind of life is going to work for you. Period. End of story. Just because other people went through something that on the surface might look way more traumatic than what you went through, and they are fine, does not negate your experience. Because adverse experiences and how they affect us are not relative and they're not comparative. It has nothing to do with anyone else. Whatever kind of support you need, however you have been impacted, is valid and real. And you deserve the support that you need to move through it. Okay? So I understand that we want to write off our own pain and our own trauma, because it gives us this feeling or this sense that if I do that, if I can really convince myself of this, I won't be in pain anymore. But I guarantee you, right? In real reality, you've probably been trying to convince yourself of this for a very long time. And it probably has not worked. Right? That's always the question we want to ask ourselves. Not that I am a fan of this person, but as Dr. Phil would say, how's that working for you? Trying to invalidate yourself, I guarantee you, has never once led you to a place where you're just better and where the effects of your trauma go away and you don't need help and you don't need support and you're fine. You can just get on with life the way that you're supposed to. The only way through is through. And you need whatever kind of processing and support and therapy, coaching, self-love path that you need. And it is what it is. So a huge part of this path is just accepting where you're at, how your experiences affected you, what the ways that you have adapted, and then what you need in order to heal and what you need in order to find a life that works for you. And it's going to be different from everyone you know. It's going to be different from your siblings. It's going to be different from your friends, because it doesn't have anything to do with anyone else. Your experience is valid. Your experience is yours. The way that you perceived it was how you perceived it. And so what you need to heal from that is completely dependent on you. Okay? So whenever you think that thought, they had it worse than me, I shouldn't be reacting this way, it's a lie. You're reacting and responding exactly in alignment with what you went through and how it affected you. And the only way through is to validate that, to accept that, and then to deal with what is. We can't think our way out of it. We can't convince ourselves that we shouldn't be feeling this way, and therefore we won't. We can't get rid of all of the ways that we've adapted by simply convincing ourselves that it wasn't that bad or comparing our pain to someone else. That's not how reality works. It affected you the way that it affected you, and you need the support that you need. You are responding in the exact way that you should be responding, based on how you perceived it, based on all the other contributing factors and based on what you went through and who you are. Okay? Okay. So hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully that was clarifying. Your experience is valid. You're allowed to center your experience versus what other people think you should be experiencing and thinking. Let's make it real, because it is. You deserve that validation. And then you deserve whatever support you need. Okay? You're not doing it wrong. You can't do it wrong. You're not responding wrong. You're responding exactly how you're responding. So on the self-love path, we say, if this is how I'm responding, what do I need to be supported? We don't say, I shouldn't be responding this way. How do I get rid of this response? The response is the response. So what do you need to be supported? Okay? Okay. Hopefully that was helpful. Let me know if you have any questions. Let me know if you want coaching. All the links are in my description box or in my bio or in my link tree. And I will see you next week.